doing?
And we are live.
The bottom line is, can you get it fixed?
Next year.
We'll
I'm
talk.
still maybe have it.
Okay.
Maybe. We'll see. We have that all, I know, right?
Okay,
Hi, good, how are you?
well, we can talk. Okay, this is Senate Appropriations. February 5th, 9 days to balance it. I'm gonna do a countdown. We are talking about the Budget Adjustment Act of FY26, and we have JFO and the tax department give us a presentation. So I'll let you introduce yourselves and talk to us about the child care fund.
Sure, so Emily Byrne, the Joint Fiscal Office.
Andrew Stein, Chief Operating Officer of Taxes.
And so we're going to talk about specific language in the Budget Adjustment Act that was recommended by the governor and approved by the House that addresses the year-end closeout of the general fund and how the child care contribution, which is the payroll tax, makes its way from the general fund to the child care contribution special fund at year end.
Are you calling it a matrix or a construct?
Construct?
I've heard some people say it's the year-end construct.
Oh, yeah. What did I say?
You just called it the closeout procedure.
Oh.
Some people call it construct, some people call it a matrix. I was gonna call it a rubric.
The
I went-
process. I'm gonna call it the process,
Okay.
the year-end process. And I think before I get into the actual language and the mechanics of how the closeout process works, got Andrew here from the tax department to talk about why this is necessary. Yeah.
So,
It's fixing a problem.
Yes.
It's fixing an administrative problem that I also am going to tease a couple of years in the future. What might be a smaller fix related to this, but let me just explain the general issue. The general issue is this. Actually, before I get into this general issue, let me explain to you why we did this. So when we were voluntold to stand up the child care contribution, as every year we're voluntold to do many things. We weren't certain at that time. There were some different versions of the child care contribution that came through, and frankly, there were different versions of a payroll tax that were coming through for different purposes. Ultimately, this is the version that came through, and this was the priority that the legislature had that session. And so, thankfully, the legislature decided to use a pretty simple construct for this. And so earlier versions would have been a lot more complicated and would have required us to stand up their own tax type. So the child care contribution is its own tax type, but on the tax side, what we did to implement it is we folded it into two existing tax structures. So withholding and personal income tax. And ultimately, it's an assessment on employers. And so the only employers that are paying it on the personal income tax side are self-employed individuals. And that accounts for about 1.5% of total revenue. So vast majority of this revenue is businesses that have W-2 wage earners working for them. And so it's paid as part of withholding. And right now,
The same as a payroll tax. People call payroll tax, they're talking about withholding.
well, it's a little bit different because withholding is used for personal income tax. It's a way of ensuring that the state has the necessary cash flows throughout the course of the year and people are paying their personal income taxes. Employers are actually remitting it on behalf of employees, but you get your W-2 at the end of the year and you file your personal income taxes and it's like, I've already paid this much through withholding. This is different. Although depending on the structure, employers can pass some of this through to employees in terms of who foots the bill for this, which I can give more information on that later. But the reason we did that, well, two reasons. One is in terms of implementation costs, to stand this up as its own tax type in our system would have cost $1.25 to $2 million, depending on how we did it. So wanted to save that. We had a general fund appropriation that we never used for that. This was a couple of years ago. So saving taxpayers money, that was part of it. But frankly, I think an even bigger reason why we did this is it just made it easier for taxpayers. Essentially, it's like these are tax types that already exist. We add an extra line on the return, and that's where they permit. And then they pay for it as part of the the processes that they're already using to remit taxes, withholding and personal income taxes. Now, the issue that this created, and we knew that this was an issue at the tax department, but it wasn't until the end of the fiscal year that Summit Finance and Management and the Joint Fiscal Office realized, oh, there's a bigger issue that we hadn't all envisioned here, which is when you're remitting it on withholding, again, it's 98.5% of revenue. We're talking about $80 to $82 million a year. When you're remitting this as part of withholding, the withholding returns in that first year come in on October 25th, January 25th, April 25th, and July 25th. And July 25th is after the end of the fiscal year, and it's after the end of that true-up period between fiscal years. And so what that meant was we didn't have the data. Again, we knew that this would be the case on the tax side. We didn't have the data to send the money to the child care special fund because we're getting all the withholding, all the child care contribution receipts together. And there's no way for us to break that out until we have the return. When the return comes in, we have that data, the money automatically goes child care special fund out of the general fund. The issue was at the end of the fiscal year, there was an additional roughly $20 million sitting in the general fund that was owed to the child care special fund that we wouldn't have the data to shift over. And there were also statutes in place that required transfers out of the general fund for other purposes. And so the question was, how are we going to deal with this? And we dealt with it on the fly by coming up with an estimate at the end of the year based on the initial 3 quarters. And it was transferred out. And I'll let Emily touch more on that part later. But that's ultimately the reason why we're doing this. We'll need to do it again this year. We'll need to do it again the following fiscal year. But what I'm hopeful is we're at the beginning of a version upgrade to our system, and we're going to have the functionality which we haven't had in the past as part of this version upgrade to on the withholding. The vast majority of payments that we receive for withholding come in electronic. For us to be able to have a line for the child care contribution and withholding. So employers will be able to break out what's child care contribution and what's withholding when they make that payment in the future. It's going to require a bit of education. It's going to require some outreach. Some people aren't going to do it right. And then we're going to get the return. It'll automatically true up in our system. But in general, we're going to be able to get a lot more money into the child care special fund sooner rather than later. And I think it's also worth mentioning this is only an issue for the last quarter. So for 3 quarters out of the year, this isn't an issue. It's the last quarter. And based on that last quarter, the VAT, I have some numbers on here. What percentage is electronic payments are 99.17% of all withholding tax and child care contribution payments. So if through outreach and education and this additional structure that we're going to have in our system, we're able to direct people to pay sooner rather than later, that's going to alleviate the need to transfer to do this estimate considerably. There may still be, and it's something that the Joint Fiscal Office, Finance and Management, Legislature will want to consider. There may still be like $1 to $2 million that folks want to adjust and participate. But in general, I think we're going to be able to ultimately resolve this issue in future years.
Okay, good. Yes, there was.
Thank you. I think there was so you mentioned that it's like the fact that it's July 25th is part of the problem, but what I felt like I was hearing was that even if we were, or I guess this is really a question, if we were to change it somehow to be earlier in the month, or even like June 30th, does that, I'm guessing that does not solve the problem still.
So it's receipts for after June. So the way the trust had, we give businesses 25 days to organize all of the information necessary to.
Okay.
And it aligns with better reporting requirements too. Like we get better compliance if the state aligns better with.
Okay.
Like we wouldn't support moving
the date. So moving the date.
Also other issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Right. You need, thinking about it like as an employer, right? You need time for like sometimes the pay period crosses that time period, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you're not gonna process your payroll potentially until later. So like you need that true up time.
Right. And then we end up in this space where we're having to chew up even later. Yeah, basically.
Which she can.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
Right.
All right.
Mr. Chair?
Ultimately, this wasn't
Oh,
an issue.
we have a Senator Ruth.
Oh, hello, everybody. I am assuming that that this is purely an accounting measure, and I've heard from several sources in JFO, for instance, that it's not connected and to any attempt to move money to other priorities. My question would be, I haven't been able to get exact figures on what the uptake is of the child care special funds. I know that last fiscal year, there was a percentage that was not being utilized. I know that attempts were made to increase utilization, and I'm wondering if you have that figure at this point.
I don't, but DCF just provided a presentation to House Ways and Means this morning on this. I did the first part of the presentation, 10 minutes, just an overview on the revenue side and what uptake looked like in terms of revenue and compliance there. Because initially in the first quarter, we did have a little bit of issues with non-compliance. We did have a really large payroll company that had an error in their calculation, but after 3 months, that was all resolved. But DCF then provided a presentation on these exact issues, Senator, and I think they did they had a nice presentation on this. I think if you all are interested in that, I'm sure they'd be happy to come in here and provide that. But I defer to DCF on that.
Okay, understood. And it would be great if DCF were somehow listening, if someone could notify them.
Well, they're coming in today to talk about something else, but we could talk to them about that, but also Al could see if we could fit them on the agenda.
Yeah, Janet McLaughlin and Carolyn.
If they're appearing today, then we can ask them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, they received similar questions this morning, right? Explaining the situation. One thing I'll say is if this wasn't an issue with the mandatory statutory transfers, the general plan was in the first year, there would be less money in the child care country, the child care special fund for the end of the fiscal year, knowing that, as of July, it was all going to be in there. And the initial thought was this would be a first year problem because every year after that, there would be 4 quarters. But because of this issue that Emily's going to provide an overview of with some of the required transfers, if you make this transfer that first year, you have to do it every single year unless we can resolve it with that other process that I explained. So.
Great. All right. I will share my screen, get a little presentation to walk through this. And this is, as Andrew alluded to, this is language that we came up with over the summer. Tax Department, Finance and Management, and the Joint Fiscal Office together. So it's sort of consensus process, and is effectively the process that we did in FY25, just codifying it so that it's clear. I think that right when Finance and Management goes to close the books, they want clear instructions on like do this, then do this, then do this, and this. Having to do this process outside of the what was in statute. Works, but it's better for everybody if it's documented and they know exactly what to do. And when auditors come, they can say it's the process that we follow. So at a high level, we'll go through the language, talk about the current state, why it's necessary again, and then what this new language does. So I was in here a couple months ago to talk about the closeout process, but just to real quick overview of the current closeout process. So there are two pieces that govern what happens at the end of the fiscal year closeout and what happens to any revenue in the general fund that's unallocated, right? So sometimes the revenues come in higher than was forecasted and budgeted, and then we have to figure out what to do with those funds. So the first thing that happens is outlined in 32 VSA 308. The first thing that happens is we fill up the general fund stabilization reserve. So this is the rainy day fund. This is the first reserve. We budget to do this, so we always know it's 5% of prior year appropriations.
So when we close out FY 26, it's up 25 or it's up 26 because you're kind of doing it in 27.
And when we close 26, the stabilization will be reserved at 5% of the FY 2025 appropriations.
And we put that in FY 26 budget.
In the FY 26 budget, we made an assumption that we're gonna need to transfer this much more. We know what the appropriations are by the time you pass the
But
2026
sometimes they
budget.
switch a little bit.
Sometimes it moves around, the AA moves it around, right? But we know that's what that number is gonna be. So 5% of prior year appropriations. And then after that, follow 30 VSA 308C. So this one, we get a lot of discussion about in this committee. Sometimes it gets not withstood or things get put in front of the line on this. This is anything after you fill up the stabilization reserve. It's split between the rainy day fund and the state teachers retirement fund and the state employees retirement funds.
And if the rainy day fund, the general fund balance reserve doesn't have a cap.
The rainy day fund has a 10% of prior year
So
appropriation.
if we got to the cap, what would happen?
If we got to the cap, what would happen is 50% would go to the pension fund, and the remaining 50% would just sit in the general fund and be unallocated, unreserved,
Just go to the bottom.
but just sit there for next year.
Okay. So what?
I seem to remember a couple of years ago, there was like this, the waterfall of like, there were all these groups that were
Yeah.
hoping for the contingent money.
Yeah.
With this construct, that doesn't allow for that.
Okay, so, okay.
We do
Yeah.
address that.
Okay, this is like statute, all else equal, nobody does anything, there's no contingency list, nothing. This is what happens at the year end. So in FY 2025 for closeout, finance and management and JFO tax department worked together to estimate the amount of the payroll taxes collected in the fourth quarter. If we hadn't estimated that, it would have been in the general fund at year end. It would have been subject to this statutory requirements, right? So how the money would go to the rainy day fund and then get split between the pensions and everything. We said, whoa, well, that's not the intent. This is payroll tax money. It's not like it goes to the general fund because of the administrative mechanics, but it really is childcare contribution special fund money. So we came up with an estimate for the fourth quarter, and those funds were sort of reserved. They were they were put in a box, if you will, to be transferred to the childcare special fund once the number was trued up. So that money we sort of put to the side and said, it's not going to be subject to the closeout process. Once finance and management, once they were reserved, once we agreed upon that number, finance management completed the closeout process, did what they needed to do. Once it was closed, they unreserved the money and then they transferred it to the child care contribution special fund that protected it from the statutory closeout process. So this is what happened in FY 25. So the first thing was follow 32,308. 5% went to the stabilization reserve. That's always the first thing that happens. This was after we had reserved that money. Then we had the list of contingent transactions. So this is what Senator Watson was referring to. So in the budget bill, the General Assembly had not withstood the next step, the 32,308C, and said prior to executing 308C, fund this list of contingent transactions. And then do 308C. And those contingent transactions, if you'll recall, right, is the money that the $50 million that went to the agency administration for the emergency board to move, the $8 million for EDS, and then the $2 $30 million reserves. And then after that, anything left on the bottom line went to the rainy day fund and then to retirement funds. And
Step 2 always have the notwithstanding
yes.
of the 308C.
Yeah, and I believe at closeout last year, there was about $1 million that went to the rainy day fund and then not quite $500,000 that went to the pension fund.
There
So
was
even- there was still a little bit of money left.
Does that answer your question, Sam?
It does. I think I need to understand a little bit more about like how notwithstanding works, because it's sort of like, so because this step 2 is like notwithstanding this other construct, we're going to allocate this money. And then as soon as that is accomplished, step 3 or 308C still happens. It's kind of like, it's not deleting it. It's just,
It's one of those like,
Come on, for the purpose of that money, we had whatever, $100 million in the contingency, but after you get to the 100 million, then you, whatever's left, it's 308C would have fun.
Yeah,
So yeah, and it's really like whatever's left, and it's possible. You only get through part of the contingent list. It's possible you never get to the contingent list. It's possible, like that there's steps along the way. Because we don't know what the revenues will be until closeout is done.
I guess I have one follow-up question. I apologize. And maybe you said this, but what determines how far down the list you get if you're also going to do
The amount of money that's available.
So, okay, so it's possible that you don't get through the whole contingency list and then there's nothing left over in for you.
Correct.
If you don't get through the contingency list, you're never gonna have 308.
Okay,
It's only
that
to
makes
get
sense.
all the way through the contingency list.
Okay.
What's ever
It's
left.
not like there's some like.
And it's in fact, when Ms. Burns said that we talked about this because some people want there to be money that goes to 308C. And they're like, you're
Right.
feeling it,
Yes.
308C purposes
Yes.
with a contingent. list. And that's where it gets controversial.
Okay. I think I'm good. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I'll go through the proposed BAA language. So what the BAA language does is codifies what actually happened in 2025. It ensures that finance management can still close the general fund timely. So like they could wait to close the general fund until after the tax department has received all of those returns and made the reconciliation, but it's good to get the general fund closed timely so we can see where we're at. And then it's also ensures the child care contribution special fund gets all the money that the child care contribution special fund is due. So part A of the new section. I forgot to bring what actual section it is in the VA. You can check. Sorry. So annually, no later than the close of the first week of the new fiscal year, tax, JFO, and finance management will come to a consensus estimate on the anticipated fourth quarter receipts that are due to the child care contribution special fund. We'll figure out what that is. We were pretty close. We were very it's doable. I'm pretty close on. So we'll figure out what that number is. As part of the annual closeout process, the Commissioner of Finance and Management will reserve the amount that those three parties have agreed to is attributable to the child care contribution and reserve it in the general fund prior to doing 308C. So we will always fill the rainy day fund, or not the rainy day, excuse me, the stabilization fund, 5% fund. And then the next thing that will happen is reserve the child care contribution fund and then do 308C. Once closeout is done, the Commissioner of Finance and Management will unreserve that money in anticipation of transferring it to the child care contribution fund. If the amount that's unreserved is greater than the actual receipts due to the child care special fund, then the excess. So if we reserve $100 million, but it turned out that there was only $95 million worth of child care contribution that was collected, that $5 million will get allocated in accordance with 308C, right? So it will go to the pensions and the rating. If the amount unreserved is less than the actual receipts due to the child care special fund, then the difference between the amount reserved and the amount actually owed will be unreserved from the balance reserve, and it will go to the child care contribution special fund to make that whole. This does not contemplate, like, if money ends up in the pensions that shouldn't have gone to the pensions because we didn't reserve enough money, it doesn't go back in and take it back out of the pension funds. It will just take it out of the general fund balance reserve to cover that difference. But it makes sure that in either direction, the child care contribution special fund is made whole and is paid all of the payroll taxes too.
Sorry, so general fund balance reserve, that's not the rating date.
No, that's that is the rainy day fund, sorry.
Okay, because
It is the rainy day. Fund. It's not the initial, the stabilization, the initial, the secondary reserve.
Gotcha.
It's the extra rainy day fund.
This is, yeah, that's what they're kind of both right. So just to try to walk it through step by step. So at the end of The FY 26, what will happen is first 308 reserve money for the stabilization reserve. And so this is, yeah, all that stuff. Reserve the amount owed to the child care contribution special fund. Will be the consensus estimate of the fourth quarter payroll tax that are due. And then anything, once that's reserved, then we do step 3, go to the general fund balance reserve, retirement funds. Then unreserve the amount that was reserved in step 2 for the payroll tax. And transfer it to the child care contribution fund. And then step 5 will be that reconciliation process, figure out if it was the right amount that was transferred or not, and then true it up accordingly. So that's what the statutory PAA proposal is. I should also throw out there that there's a change in the budget adjustment specifically related to 26. So first is 308C. Then the governor proposed to reserve $74.9 million general fund to buy down property taxes in fiscal year 2027, if there's any additional revenue at the end of the year. Then step 3 is to reserve the amount for the child care contribution fund. Then
You have to consider transfer into that special fund. When you're reserving it, what are you doing?
You're like,
Transferring it?
you're not transferring it. You just say,
Put a box around it.
you put a box around it. Yeah. There's no real good way to, yeah, it stays in the general fund. It's
Right.
part of the general fund. It's just like restricted within the general fund. So reserve the child care amount, then follow 308C, whatever's left. Goes to the pensions and the rainy day fund. And then unreserve it and transfer it to the child care contribution special fund, and then true it up. I should point out, this is what the governor proposed. What's in the House version is actually flipping steps 3 and steps 2. So what the House has proposed is that first set aside the money for the stabilization reserve, then reserve the money for the child care contribution fund, and then set aside money for property tax buy down, then do 308C. So there is a little bit of a change for you guys to contemplate. And we can talk about pros and cons and why, but I believe I believe Adam Gresham spoke about it yesterday, and it's in the technical letter. But that's just a small change.
So there isn't we didn't have to, because I think last week David was talking about, well, maybe we set up an actual reserve. But we're not setting up a reserve account. There's not a new reserve fund.
It's really like a temporary mechanism that finance will use for like 4 days in July. Or 2 weeks in July. Yeah, it'll be reserve it, close the general fund, unreserve it.
Okay. Makes sense. You have another question?
I have so many questions.
Great.
So I wanted to make sure that I understand. So there's some decision to be made about whether we flip steps 2 and steps 3. Is that right?
Mhm.
So maybe you're gonna talk about this, but yeah. So I'm curious as to what you think the pros and cons might be of which order.
Sure. So right now, if in the event we get to June 30th, or once the general fund is ready to be closed, and there is not enough money to meet the 70, and then we've done our best budgeting, we assume there's going to be a certain amount left on the bottom line, right? 75 plus whatever is supposed to go to the stabilization reserve. That number is less than what we thought it was going to be. The way this is set up means set aside the money in the stabilization reserve, set aside the $74 million, and then maybe you don't reserve as much as you thought you were going to reserve, right? So there's this sort of, the step process, in step 3, right? So would you then, would you want to reserve the payroll tax first and then see how much the $75 million is available to set aside for next year, and then you can deal with the difference in the Budget Adjustment Act if you need to, or whatever. But hopefully that doesn't come to fruition, but that's the sort of thinking is what's the what would you do? What would you rather have come first in the event that the revenues don't perform to the forecast, or what we entered when we finish the budget, what we think they're gonna be?
And effective.
No, and just to make sure everybody's clear on this, my understanding, Emily, you just touched on this a little before. The way that if revenues came in low, money would actually come out of one of those reserve funds into the child care special fund. Because yeah. The aim is to make that fund whole, I know that, but financing management. Might want to chat with them more about that. That's important.
And is there language in here that would do what Andrew just said, that it would, if there's a shortage of revenue, and we do it the way the governor proposed, with the stabilization reserve, make the child care whole? Are there any different?
I think, yeah, based on the language, which part was it, part D, that says if it's less. No, so part D, if it's less than actual receipts, then you use the balance reserve to cover the transfer, so. You know. It's a good finance management.
And then you would start the next fiscal year with the general fund balance under its 5%. Or would you?
It wouldn't be under its 5% because there's no minimum for the rainy day fund. So there's a,
Right, I guess
So, right,
the next year you'd have to make up that difference.
That's the first thing that we did.
right, well, it wouldn't be the stabilization reserve, it would be the secondary
Right.
reserve. There's, which like you could make it
Right,
up,
right.
you could say like. We
Yeah,
can
we
still
don't,
have
if it's a rainy day fund, we
Right.
don't, it's a stabilization.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
I think another way of thinking about this too, though, is if you found yourself in that situation, ultimately, whatever's owed to the child care special fund, that is coming from the child care contribution. So the question, and you're ultimately lawmakers, you could make a decision, hey, we want to override this the following session.
Right.
If you wanted it to stay in the general fund, or the way that this would play out.
We not withstand stuff all the.
All the time. So,
Yeah, well, so I just wanted to make sure I was understanding. So which order did the governor recommend this? And which way has the House recommended this?
The governor recommended the $74 million and then the child care
Yeah.
reserve. The House recommended child care reserve,
Okay.
the 75.
Anything else? That's good.
Sorry, there were no puppets, I guess.
Next time,
yeah.
we'll have to appropriate some money plus puppets.
JFO.
Okay, well, there's no other questions. Thank you for your time.
Great. You
Presentation.
got James here. I'm gonna go work for James.
James, if you want
Thanks.
to move on up.
Sure.
One, Director Steffi, Joint Fiscal. Here today to talk about Section 8 housing in the House Recommended Budget Adjustment Act.
What section is the section 8 of?
So this is Section 79 in the House Recommended, which starts on line 11 of page 53.
Uh,
53 on the PDF, page 53 of the PDF.
that can be done.
Section 79, housing assistance, page 53. So this provision was not in the governor's recommended budget adjustment this year. This is a section that was added in the House Recommended Budget Adjustment Act. The basic intent purpose of this provision is to make funds available to public housing authorities to prevent the termination of Section 8 housing vouchers. They're also known as housing choice vouchers. You'll hear them referred to that way, but in presentations have been referring to them as Section 8 vouchers. It's the colloquial term that's most familiar to most. Chair Perchlik, I could start by giving a little bit of background on Section 8 housing vouchers and just like the fundamentals of how it works to the public housing authorities, if you think that would be helpful.
Yeah. It is.
Sure.
It's short.
Yeah, it is. So people are generally familiar with this program, but it's not something that the state has engaged with before, to my knowledge. Section 8 housing choice vouchers are a federal program run through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD, funds from HUD for Section 8 vouchers flow directly to public housing authorities. There's no kind of crossover with the state historically. And we have 9 public housing authorities in the state of Vermont who administer Section 8 housing vouchers.
So what can you give some examples?
Yeah, so statewide, we have the Vermont State Housing Authority, who you all may have heard of or from. They were involved in helping to coordinate this effort, this kind of proposal back when the DA was in the House. But the rest of the 9 are all municipal housing authorities. So some that might be familiar members of the committee are Montpelier Housing Authority, Barrie Housing Authority, Winooski, Burlington. There's a Rutland Housing Authority. There's 8 municipals throughout the state, and then a 9th that has statewide coverage wherever those municipal housing authorities don't operate. Public housing authorities administer other programs, other voucher programs besides Section 8, but this is definitely their bread and butter, one of their premier programs. And the way public housing authorities kind of operate is they are allowed to retain an administrative fee for every Section 8 housing voucher that is in circulation in a given calendar year. And that's where the bulk of their operational funds come from, right? Like you need folks who are out there processing contracts with landlords, sending payments to landlords. And so those positions are by and large funded by a fee collected as a based on the amount of vouchers that a public housing authority administers. That becomes relevant later when we talk about some of the financial challenges that public housing authorities have been facing in recent years. Last thing I'll say though, housing Section 8 basics is that the basic criteria for a Section 8 housing voucher is limited to low income people, generally meaning 50% or less of the area median income. We're talking about low income households, elderly people, or people with disabilities by and large when we're talking about Section 8. Any other questions about Section 8 before I move on? Great. There are about 8,000 Section 8 housing vouchers in circulation in Vermont across the 9 housing authorities. And these are funded on a calendar year basis by HUD. So those are the basics I'll flag for the committee. I think the history as to how this proposal came before the House, it is now before you all, is that public housing authorities, specifically Section 8 housing vouchers, were level funded for 2 calendar years at the federal level. So calendar year 24 and 25 were both level funded continuing resolutions. What that meant was as inflation progressed over those 2 years, particularly in the housing market, the purchasing power, so to speak, of housing vouchers went down, particularly acute in our area. Housing authorities had to deal with the fact that they no longer, their dollars weren't going as far as they once were, right? The pot of money was stable, but costs for vouchers were going up. Housing authorities have to have a balanced budget. They can't run deficits. And so the way they were dealing with this over the last few years was retiring vouchers through attrition. Meaning as folks graduate out of the program, no longer need their vouchers and return them to the housing authority, those vouchers weren't being reissued. And so they're still authorized to be issued by the public housing authorities, but they haven't had the funds to keep them in circulation.
Because do they have, is there a required match
A match from the state or
from the housing for like why could they not just pass the money through to the landlords of the Section 8 recipients? Even if it's a lower percentage of the rent.
So I think what you're describing is maybe like lowering the benefit level. It might be an example of what you're describing, right? Like lowering the subsidy given.
They're getting less money because of inflation from the feds. Why not just give less money to the recipients?
That is an option, yeah. So there are various operational adjustments that housing authorities can and have made to avoid shortfalls in funding. So retiring vouchers through attrition has been the principal means they've achieved that. But there are others. Reducing the benefit amount is another tool. So that
They just they get a lump sum. So if they had 8,000 and then they switch to 7,000, that lump sum, each individual recipient gets more money. So that's why by attrition, that's why they do it, to keep a level funding of the recipients.
I would say a couple of responses to that. The individual subsidy received by an individual or household depends on their income, their household size. So that isn't a flat amount, but it can be, it does so varies from recipient to recipient. But the subsidy level can be adjusted by the public housing authorities if they need to stretch funds further, for example.
That's why getting rid of one of the vouchers helps them because they can use. Less people, they gotta spread the money.
Yes, exactly. They're shrinking the number of vouchers that they have to pay for that are out there in circulation. And then that they have the same pool of money available to pay for other vouchers that are still in use. Right. The pot of money has stayed stable the last couple of years. They're taking that out of circulation to spread that money as far as they can.
Okay.
And there are other operational adjustments they've made as to have cost savings, right? One example is, vouchers may be taken away from participants if they break certain rules of the program a number of times. Maybe you give them 1 or 2 strikes instead of 3 or 4, taking away the voucher. As a means of taking more vouchers out of circulation, bringing your spending in line with your actual budget. These are examples of things that the housing authorities have to do. Yes. So 2 ramifications or 2 immediate consequences of taking vouchers out of circulation, as housing authorities have had to do. One is that there are fewer vouchers in circulation providing rental assistance to families in Vermont. That's the one immediate consequence. The second is every year, HUD, when they're not operating on a continuing resolution and doing level funding, does a recalculation to determine how much each housing authority is going to receive in funding. Part of that funding renewal calculation takes into account how many vouchers you had in circulation out there in use being leased by tenants in the year prior. So if you take vouchers out of circulation to bring your costs in line with your budget, that means you're having fewer vouchers included in your next year funding recalculation. Which means you being the public housing authority, see your annual funding go down year over year as you're taking more and more vouchers out of circulation. And so you can see that creates a feedback loop where you, the public housing authority, is forced to take vouchers out of circulation to lower costs. That means they get less money from HUD the next year. More vouchers taken out of circulation.
Yes, so that being known as a true vacancy savings on, I guess, but is there any way to recoup those vouchers in years moving forward if in fact we need for each shelter's need for more than throughout?
Yes. So theoretically, if HUD were to authorize or were to give public housing authorities more money in a future budget year, voucher enrollment could be increased. There's kind of 2 things to be aware of. One is the number of vouchers that the housing authorities are authorized to have in circulation. Let's call that 500, purely made up hypothetical number. But then there's the number that they're actually funded to give out. And maybe they're only funded to give out 250 housing choice vouchers. So they're authorized to give 5, they've only ever received money to give 250. Maybe next year they get an increase from the feds and they can enroll 300 people instead of 250. And then that increased enrollment would figure into their next funding renewal.
Okay, thank you.
Given that vouchers have been taken out of circulation in Vermont by our 9 housing authorities to help avoid budget shortfalls in recent years, the proposal that had been put forward in the House was that the state of Vermont would make an appropriation, the state entity, to then disperse to public housing authorities, which those housing authorities could then use to cover some of their operational costs and use the funding that's freed up in their budgets by that appropriation, by those state funds, to keep vouchers in circulation. There are some mechanics underneath that we can discuss in more detail if the committee would like. There are HUD regulations about which PHA accounts can be used for what purposes. And so there are details beneath the hood there. But essentially, the state would appropriate in the proposal before you $5 million to a state entity to distribute to public housing authorities. If public housing authorities are in the situation of needing to retire vouchers, right? They're in a shortfall position and have to retire vouchers. They could apply for this funding, demonstrate financial need to the state entity in charge of that appropriation, and receive funds to prevent the termination of vouchers. It's kind of basics. Any questions on the basic mechanics, how that would
I
work?
assume because of HUD regulations, you can't just, I guess we'd have to give it to the agencies. of the authorities.
So
I was thinking
Yeah.
they're more direct, like,
a direct appropriation, I don't believe a direct appropriation to housing authorities would be permissible. There was some discussion on the House side about whether the Vermont State Housing Authority, since they are created by the state, could receive a direct appropriation. The route that the House ended up going for various reasons, not least of which is, it just administrative capacity. An appropriation in the House proposal is made to the agency of administration to administer these
right, and
funds.
that's what I think we got paid rather adjustment.
Yes, you all have heard from Secretary Clark suggesting, I believe, that the appropriation be made to DCF. And that fund be dispersed, and funding applications be evaluated in consultation with other state agencies with subject matter expertise. So the proposal before you all today would you all might remember in fiscal year 2026, you authorized $50 million in spending authority to the agency of administration, which could then be utilized by the emergency board to compensate for lost federal funds, disruptions in federal funding, things of that nature. The proposal before you all would direct the agency of administration to utilize $5 million of that $50 million to provide this assistance to public housing authorities. You also have a proposal before you all that a technical letter from the administration has some recommended changes to how that appropriation is worded. I think the administration's preference in their technical letter is that the amount of the $50 million appropriation to AOA from last year be reduced to 45,
Right.
and that a separate appropriation in the amount of 5 million that be made for Section 8.
Makes sense.
JFO is evaluating that language, and I think we'll be in a position to speak with you all about that in more detail later this week. Just going to go through the subsections of Section 79 to make sure we haven't missed anything relevant. You'll notice that, so we have the $5 million direction to the agency of administration to use that $50 million appropriation for Section 8 assistance. Specifies the permissible uses for housing authority use of this money. So housing authorities be authorized to maintain a current housing assistance payment, that's Section 8 doctrine in other words, or to prevent the retirement of the voucher currently in use. So those would be the two permissible uses of these funds by housing authorities, either to maintain a current voucher or to prevent the retirement of the voucher. It's also important to note that this language requires that all monies dispersed under this appropriation be in line with applicable HUD regulations, guidance, etc. There was a lot of discussion on the House side about how can we make sure that this appropriation doesn't run afoul of applicable federal rules, regs, etc. And so the way that that's approached in this is to say that, where prior approval from HUD is required, Vermont will also require that approval be given before funding is dispersed. And also that the agency of administration or whoever the receiving appropriation, the receiving entity ends up being, would be required to establish procedures for validating that expenditures conform with all applicable HUD requirements, ensuring that access to funds authorized in this section is made available to all housing authorities across the state.
Question about that.
Thanks, sir.
In the distribution of that money to the different housing authorities, is there some mechanism to ensure that the distribution is proportional to like how much their need is? They don't all have the same number, like the same caseload, I guess. I'm not sure that's what word is, units, I suppose, but I guess there's a question of like how's it divided.
So in the language as drafted, you have AOA, or if you all choose to make the change request by the administration, DCF, validating the expenditures. One, conform with HUD requirements are necessary proper use of the funds after that. And that funds are available to all housing authorities. I think part of what speaks to your concern, or your question rather, is the language about proper expenses, that expenditures are necessary and proper prior to the issuance of funds. And if you look earlier in section 79, funding is available for two purposes: to maintain existing housing assistance payments or to prevent the retirement of a housing assistance payment. I would say the agency in charge of this appropriation would need to come up with some form of certifying that a housing authority is actually in a position imminently retiring a housing voucher, or in a position where vouchers might be taken out of circulation, right, before funds are issued. There's not currently language about, for example, geographical distribution of funds, dividing the funds evenly between the 9 entities, anything like that. I would say right now, and Cameron is in the room right now and drafted the language. Right now, the language contemplates is demonstrating financial need and proper use of funds, i.e. keeping vouchers in circulation. So to the extent that some housing authorities are in more imminent danger of retiring vouchers, you might see requirement put forward by the administration that's proposal to prioritize those most immediately, looking at retiring vouchers.
I guess I could just see there, the potential for 5 million is not enough, and the demand is more than can be adequately spread around. Then how does I'm just wondering about the choices that would need to be made. But anyway,
I think that's a good question, right? The guidelines that you all give to the receiving entity of this appropriation are important for those reasons, right? How is distribution prioritized?
It could be another question for DCF. How would they divide it up if they get to that situation?
If it gets to DCF.
If it gets to DCF,
Yes,
already, you're right.
yeah. How was the decision making made around giving it to AOA? And then it sounds to me as if it's an emergency board decision. You said something having an emergency board make this decision. So it sounds like another set of steps. That's one question. And then the other question is, do we have a prediction of what the funding is going to look like? Is it going to be a steady state funding from here on in? Are we going to see an exacerbation of what we're seeing right now for the past 2 years?
Thank you for that question. I think that's a really important point. This is a one-time appropriation. This is not a recurring or base appropriation.
Sustainability question.
Right. And I think not only is that the way this section is structured, but that was, the intention in House appropriations, and that was the conversation, all the conversations I heard on the House side, that this would be a one-time appropriation of funds to prevent the retirement of vouchers. To your first question, the E-Board doesn't have, as the language is currently drafted, the E-Board would not have a role in distributing these funds. The connection between this section and the E-Board is that $50 million was appropriated to AOA for use by the E-Board in fiscal year 26. Right. This section takes 5 million of that 50 and directs AOA, you all may change that, to use those funds for Section 8 housing support, for distribution public housing authorities. That's the only connection between the emergency board and this appropriation, is that it's taking 5 million of that 50 and repurposing it for Section 8 support.
And remind me how the AOA is going to distribute. What's the timing on that? I mean, rather than having it go directly to the authorities through DCF.
It's a good question. I think you would have to hear from AOA or who the receiving entity ends up being about how quickly they anticipate they could stand up administrative requirements and procedures around this appropriation. I wouldn't want to speak to how long it might take.
Well, it depends on what housing available too.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some pieces to that are how long does it take the receiving entity to set up the necessary procedures? How long does it take housing authorities to apply? How their application is verified? How long does it take for payments to be processed? that would all figure into timing. I think it's your questions for whatever agency receives these funds.
Are you know, I wanted to have some time for Attorney Boyd to come up and talk about this language. Unless there was something else.
No, I think that's it. Yeah, I think you'll hear more about this from Cameron, but just want to put a finer point on. There was a lot of conversation about making sure these funds align to the best that we can, accomplish with all federal rules and regulations. I think Cameron can in a better position to speak to that than I am, but that's definitely a part of the appropriation language that I haven't covered as much as I'd like. I think Cameron better position to speak to. So.
Thank you.
Afternoon. For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. I will be the attorney in the room, so I don't mean to bring down the mood, but I'm going to get a little serious about the language that you have in front of you. To answer some of the questions that came up already around what I'll call maybe equitable distribution of the funds that are available here. That's why you'll see the language in D2, and I believe this is going to be on page 54 of the as passed version. All it states is that the agency of administration shall ensure that access to funds is made available to all housing authorities. It doesn't say anything about whether certain funds have to be available to the local boards versus the state. So it would be a question posed to whatever administrative entity ultimately administers of how they would go about accomplishing that. And then if you all felt there needed to be stronger language to ensure certain access for the different housing authorities, you would potentially want to add additional language there. So I just want to make sure that's clear. At this point, it could be a first come, first serve type situation, in which case, as was mentioned, the kind of administrative capacity of those local housing authorities may be relevant to that conversation. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I just want to talk a little bit about the sustainability. I think that's a great question that you all need to think about. As James kind of mentioned, the way this really works and how a lot of federal programs work, unfortunately, you state get block funding, and then your funding for the following year is dictated by how many individuals you serve through the funding that we gave you. So if your numbers go down, we'll just give you less money the next year, and it kind of turns into this downward spiral. A lot of programs when I was at the Department of Labor, unfortunately, are funded that way. You serve less people this year, we'll give you less money for next year because you appears that you don't need it, which then means you have less money to serve people the following year. So that's kind of, I think there is a sustainability concern. I mean, if you inject money and assuming it works the way that it's intended to work, housing vouchers are maintained, or they're able to put in circulation, maybe additional vouchers as opposed to having to retire them. What does that mean for the following year? If the federal government cuts the program, you're still back in the same situation that you are now. I don't think that's the intention here. I'm not trying to say anything negative about that, but I do think it's a question that should be asked, and others can speak to that better than I can. What I just wanted to mention, and again, this is my role as the attorney here, is about how this could potentially operate and whether or not it's going to operate the way that it is intended to operate based on the words on the page. Okay, so when you look at this, look at page 53 and 54. The bottom of 53, lines 18 and 19 say that funding may be made available to a housing authority for one of the following purposes. You look at the next page. Maintain a current housing assistance payment in use or prevent the retirement of a housing assistance payment. So then the question becomes how they do that, and is it in alignment with applicable federal HUD regulations? You have to look at the HUD guidance that has been provided to determine whether or not this is an allowable use of state funds. And there is a question as to whether the state can do this and whether the federal government will authorize the state to do this. When you look at this guidance document, it says that housing authorities are able to use certain other funds to maintain housing assistance payments. that includes things like their unrestricted net assets, basically their administrative reserve funds. So we give you this money, you use portions of it for admin that can roll over. You can use that in future years for housing assistance payments if you would like, because it's money that we've already given to you. What the guidance appears to say, and I have to say appears because the words don't line up exactly perfectly. So I think arguments can be made. But what the guidance does say is you can't use state funds to expand use in the program. And so there are some questions here about whether or not this is going to work. Other things the guidance does say, though, the guidance does say that with HUD approval, prior approval, you can prevent the termination of assistance. So let's go back to the language on the page here, the sub 2. Says with prior approval from HUD to provide funding to a housing authority in order to prevent the termination of assistance. So the other language that is key in the BAA that you have in front of you is it does say that the agency of administration, I'm on D1 now, the agency of administration shall establish procedures for validating that such expenditures conform to applicable HUD requirements. So there's a question about whether the sub 1 on page 54 is going to accomplish the goal that you're intending to accomplish. HUD could come in and say, this is contrary to our guidance, you cannot do this. In which case, you can go to the 2 and seek HUD approval, and they may approve it, but that's only going to be to not terminate vouchers. It's not going to be to maintain current ones. And then you also do have the backstop of the agency having to validate that any payments are in compliance. So I'm not here to say that don't do this. Please don't interpret what I'm saying incorrectly. You do have the backstops in the language, I think, to ensure that monies are expended in compliance with the federal guidance. I'm just wanting to make sure that you all are aware that there is a question about what is the mechanism that this is going to lead in practice.
So is the risk that they would just deny it? Or, or they wouldn't allow us to, they wouldn't use it to create our formula for next year? Or is there a chance of like penalty or something?
I don't think there's a chance for a penalty. I think it's just a chance that the federal government says you can't use it for some of these purposes. And then you seek HUD approval prior to termination, and they may only authorize a subset of funds. So you may not end up expending the 5 million all, this fiscal year or this calendar year, in which case you're not putting that kind of backstop against the downward spiral of housing vouchers that the money's intended.
Because I would assume this is allowed other states to do.
That's kind of I think the purpose of the guidance. If a state could simply inject money into the program such that it dictates what the federal government gives you the following year, then I think more states could take that approach. And then it's kind of the states having a little bit of dictation of how much money they're going to get from the federal government. I imagine that's probably why this guidance is here, to say you're not going to do that. You're only going to do it with our permission.
Okay.
And just a fiscal corollary to what Cameron just pointed out, if to the extent that HUD does permit public housing authorities to use funds to prevent the termination of vouchers, despite this being a one-time appropriation, part of the thinking behind this proposal was that to the extent housing authorities are prevented from terminating more vouchers, they're increasing the amount of vouchers that are used for future funding recalculations at the federal level. And so the intention, the idea behind the proposal is that there would be some dividends in future years in terms of maximizing federal funding by keeping vouchers in circulation or preventing them from being terminated. I think those are all good points to consider about whether HUD will allow that and federal uncertainty, but it's a one-time appropriation with the idea being that there will be a benefit for at least a certain number of years to keep vouchers in circulation and part of funding recalculations.
It's worth a try.
So the one thing I would just mention, I think if regardless of whether you keep it with the agency of administration, you move it to another administrative agency, keeping D1 in or some sort of requirement of that dispersing entity to ensure that the disbursements are in compliance with HUD regs. Because to be clear, like, you're not gonna take state money and inject it directly into the state housing authorities, you know, payment assistance bank accounts to then pay out. This is gonna be kind of, you know, an administrative dance, if you will.
Right.
And so I just want to emphasize the need to maintain some sort of level of oversight there in that regard.
Okay. I have a question on, moving on from your term, which I appreciate, is on C, a vote of the majority of the housing authorities. So is it just any vote, positive or negative? A vote.
So that's a good question. A vote of the majority of the housing authorities commissioners shall be required prior to requesting. The way I was drafting that, and it wasn't, it was the request to draft it to ensure that there was an affirmative vote from the commissioners to seek access to the funds before the housing authority moved forward. So that's the intention behind that language.
But there were affirmative in there.
I think that would help clarify. Yes, sir.
An affirmative vote. Yeah.
Because you could have a majority say no, and then you could say that.
Or no recommendation.
And then on F, on that, I assume the intent of F is to make sure this fund's carried forward.
Yes, sir.
So working in a way that makes it seem like it would revert.
Only if it is by an act of the General Assembly. So the housing authorities don't operate on a fiscal year, state fiscal year. They operate a calendar year, you know, so this is intended to be for FY 26 budget adjustment. So that language was there to ensure that the funds would still be available post July, unless there was an act of the General Assembly to revert the money. So it would be available in FY
So what if it's
27.
an act, like we have, I thought we had language that said that all money will revert, or we do have language in the statute that says all money will revert in basically.
There's
But
there's language in the BAA to that effect. I would
No,
not.
just in statutes from the past. It's
Well,
just in statute. So does that count as an act, even though we did it from before? Is that would still be an act of the General Assembly?
I'll defer that question to the joint fiscal office. I'm not aware of that language, so.
Right, but this gets, I have a question about reverting, and that's, so we have language in the VA that says all funds will be carried forward, or gives authority to section 86.
You should have looked into is say it was not going to be fair.
Right, it's just worded a little differently here, so I wonder if we wanted to carry forward, I would just say shall carry forward.
Right.
Because I think the act that we have and that things would revert could trigger the second part of it, that it's reverted.
I think initially we simply had that the unexpended appropriation shall carry forward into subsequent fiscal years and remain available. There was some tweak to the language by JFO, so that's why I would just.
I think
defer-
the first one was better because it goes without saying that if we take it, you know, if we revert it or we notwithstand it, we don't need to say that we're. But we'll let JFO think about that. Maybe we have to figure it out right now. Okay. Right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate the.
You should.
All right. So now we'll move to DCF. I don't know if we have DCF / OEO. I guess OEO is not like,
Lily's, but
OEO is part of DCF. I guess it is.
yeah.
I think of it as different departments.
Good afternoon. Lily Sojourner with the Office of Economic Opportunity, which is in Department for Children and Families, which is one of the largest, I think, departments across state government, especially the agency of human services. So we are like 21 people out of, I think, over 1,000 people in the department. We are in charge of the department. Yeah, thank you for
I forgot what we
Having
were, well, we were actually gonna ask people to talk about right now.
So what we were gonna,
Oh, the shelter.
okay.
And maybe we have other stuff.
Can we ask about this too? Can you
Well,
comment?
this sheet's for the OEO,
on-
not even when we have questions for DCF about other things.
I'm happy to try to answer, whatever I can. I have my colleague Melanie Marvel here with me from the department, and we can take notes, and if we can't answer the questions, we can get back to you.
Right.
With responses, so.
So we have questions for DCF about the childcare fund. We have, so the administration has asked that this program about these Section 8 vouchers be administered by DCF and not by agency of administration. We had questions for either DCF or AOA about how they would administer it. But we had to talk specifically about the HUF. But
So I think we can
is that-
follow up with
okay.
Janet, regarding the childcare fund. I think regarding the Vermont State Housing Authority shelter or, funding for subsidies, I think it was helpful for me to listen to the prior testimony, and I think for whether it's AOA or DCF, we would just have to understand how much administrative work that would be to ensure that compliance. And I'm not sure that we have previously been aware of what was just being reviewed in terms of the necessary monitoring, but we can follow up on that.
Okay.
That has to start with the shelter and
Yeah.
VA questions.
Great, thank you.
I think my understanding is just a general overview of the $2 million. Is that correct? Our VA asked
Yeah.
for shelter investments. So, yeah, thank you so much. As you know, over the past few years, we have made investments in community-based shelters across the state, growing our shelter capacity for Vermonters experiencing homelessness. That is a complicated and winding road sometimes to create a shelter from nothing. It often involves complex real estate acquisition, significant permitting, zoning processes and communities, as well as sometimes very complicated and long-term rehabilitation of properties. And so we have projects identified that we would like to be able to move forward to continue to develop access to shelter capacity in the state. And that is what that $2 million is identified to allow us to do.
And is there language on this, or is it just the $2 million? They're party million.
Well, just certainly, yeah, essentially.
Okay.
I think there's language.
So it's B325, if anybody was looking for it, either on your
I would propose something different than what the administration proposed.
but is that's just, so it'll be different in the aspects. Or what can explain what the continuing in your explanation of the request.
I think, right, I mean, I think it's challenging to give project specific details because again, these are happening in communities with sometimes legal and other dynamics that we don't want to get ahead of that could potentially inadvertently derail a project, but primarily it's for significant renovations for a project that we want to be able to support.
And is it, so I think people have asked if it's new shelters, so it's supporting shelters, or both, or maybe it depends on.
This would be creating more year-round capacity.
So it could be
Is our
an existing
goal.
shelter, it could be a cold weather shelter that you're making year round, or adding beds to an existing.
Right, we're trying to create more year-round shelter capacity in the system.
And it could be ones that are run by the state or by third parties.
This would be community-based providers as the operator.
Okay. And then the house reduced from 2 million to 680,000. Did they move money around? Why does it say it's net neutral?
From a general fund standpoint, it's the same amount of money. So they reduced the amount and then they redirected it to section 81. If you look in the language.
So another another activity that we support is client financial assistance. So this is direct financial assistance to benefit individuals experiencing or at risk of homelessness, things like security deposit, rental arrears, utility deposit. And so the house alternative was a reduction in the shelter portion of the 2 million and then use the remainder for increased client-based financial assistance.
And that would be direct those, or would you fund that through?
We have-
providers?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. We have fund administrators in communities across the state. And so the way that process works is we allocate funds to them. They receive applications from individuals and their housing case managers to say, hey, here's my housing plan. Here's how this money would fit into it. Talk about things like budget, maybe other resources they're leveraging. And so the house proposal looks to increase that stuff.
So with the providers that the list, the House Amendment made, those are the same providers you would have used for that assistance programs, or just maybe different amounts?
I don't think I saw their list of specific providers. I'm sorry.
Do you want to see my hero?
That would be so
Here,
cool.
this-
I'm sorry.
Here, this is a list.
On page 56.
Thank you so much. I'm assuming it's the same list. And we have that.
It's,
Oh,
it's
so they,
across the state.
yeah.
Yes.
So they,
Let's take out 1.3 of the 2 million and divide it amongst these providers.
To bring them back to 2025 levels is what it says in the language.
yeah, I think that these are the providers that we work with as fund administrators, although New Story Center is not their domestic violence shelter in Rutland. We also have some shelters that have, and Good Samaritan Haven in this case, it looks like they are not necessarily following our allocation. So they've sort of blended together here, both the fund administrators as well as shelters have some direct financial assistance that we refer to as like diversion funding. So they can, in the moment, if someone's able to make a plan, they can do that really quickly to hopefully prevent someone from coming to homelessness or help them exit closely. So it looks like they have included our fund administrators, but have also included 2 shelters. I think there are 2 levels here. One is the administration and the House have different proposals. But I think if you went with the House's proposal, I think the administration would prefer that the total amount of the 1.3 comes to our office for distribution based on the spending that we are seeing at the moment. So we quarterly track each fund administrator's spending. And so I think that would allow for more real-time allocation than this, which I believe they probably identified. Oh, it looks like they have groundworks on here too, that they probably identified in the fall. So that would be a change. If you accepted the House's proposal as an alternative to the administration's, I would just ask that we be able to allocate the money based on real-time spending as we're seeing it across the communities.
Have you seen a change since the fall?
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if you'd seen a change since the fall.
I actually have a meeting with my team on Friday to review the second quarter spending. So it'll be hot off the presses. Yeah, we receive quarterly updates on spending from all of our recipients of financial assistance. And so we would have our updated projections. And I could share some of that back with you. I think again, by the time maybe you even get a few weeks later into the process, this could be out, that would just be a potential recommendation if you were to move forward with this.
Yeah, maybe.
But
So. Or is it you pay the providers on a reimbursement basis?
our grants allow, with general funds, we allow for up to a month of an advance, as long as they're reporting monthly to us of their spending. We want to make sure that the spending is flowing and going out the door, but we recognize it as a pressure for them. So we do allow for a month in advance. It's not purely reimbursement.
Okay. So your request, which is kind of, I'll hold you to it, because it kind of came up with it, that we might list all these providers and open if there's other ones that are not missed or ones that don't think there should be in here, but that, so you be allowed to make the allocation and that it's not set in the bill. That's what you would prefer.
Consistent with current needs.
Something like.
Right, so again, recognizing that before this, right, the administration has a different proposal than the House.
Right.
And however, if you were to move forward with this House's recommendation, I would request that adjustment, because I would also hate, for instance, to then be locked in. If after second quarter spending, we're seeing, oh, one of these providers does not need this much, but another needs more.
Right.
I'd rather we're able to make that flexibility.
Is payments to the provider something that you were thinking of happening with the $2 million?
Not in our BAA.
You would just
No, we would be
Usually
focusing on
providing-
the shelter the shelter expansion one-time investment.
okay.
Thank you so much. There you go.
Okay, well, if you have anything in writing that you want to send to our committee about how you would suggest the language change, we welcome to see that.
Great.
Able to do that, that would be helpful.
What is your timeline for that? What timeline would be helpful?
Yeah, I think Tuesday we're hoping to vote it
Okay.
out. But we'll see how that goes. That's the goal.
Right.
Okay. And you have it, has your committee talked about this stuff?
Tomorrow morning,
Okay,
we're gonna be looking at everything that relates to us. Amy's coming in with Nolan.
okay. So you're taking up this and the other section of
We'll
it.
take, we've got a whole,
Will BAA morning
we
tomorrow?
have a BAA,
Okay, great.
won't take us. Yeah, we have,
Okay, great. Okay, well, I don't think we have,
Okay.
is there something else you want to tell us?
No, thank you so much, and my apologies for not noting this second page of this, but thank you, and we can send some additional information.
Okay, that'd be great.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks for your-
You can hear
thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate
there's
it.
a part of you between,
I really appreciate it.
okay.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if your committee provide us a recommendation on that.
We'll try, right, and we have, I've been working on some language, looking at the designated agency issue with the administration, and Nolan's been a huge help with that. And then I have another little piece of language that I'll be bringing in.
Okay.
I forgot what section.
I do have this ready discussion now.
Yeah,
I have a couple of questions. One in reference to the childcare care acts or whatever else. Are there any, we appear to be like having 5,000 children a year in Vermont. And we're losing like 6,700 people a year in Vermont. This was originally set up, I believe, somewhere around, hopefully raised to $125 million. I see where, some going into was there a cap on this? At what point in time, also, we don't need $125 million, we still have taxpayers for something that we said it's going toward this. It's really not no more because we've lost so much population. We lost 1,800 people last year out of the state. But that was my question.
yeah, I think it's a fair question. And I think we heard from like Let's Grow Kids and Building Bright Futures about the whole childcare ecosystem, like how many, but the need out there. And so I think that would be a good question for them. I would assume that they would, if there's still a need, if there's families that can't find slots for childcare, they might need to spend more money to get those slots, because it's difficult. Like, I know we still have a shortage of infant childcare. It's very difficult for families to find infant childcare, so they might have to spend more money to get somebody to open an infant childcare. But yeah, I think at some point, if those demographic changes continue, where we're not having children that need care, and
We really continued this payroll tax when it wasn't intended for, what we may be spending. for. We can always find a way to spend the money, but that's not what we.
right, well, I think it would be a good thing to bring up if somebody wanted to take money out of the fund or something else. Like they say, like, hey, we don't need it. And that kind of happened last year with some of the reserves. The governor was saying, like, well, some of this money spend elsewhere because we don't need it this year. We said, no, we want to save it. We want it to carry forward year to year and meet needs. But if somebody says, hey, we should take 25 million out of the childcare fund, and use it for paving roads because we have a need there. Then somebody could say, like, hey, you're paying a tax for childcare, not for road paving. You should use it for.
Right, that's the case. I'm glad Emily came back, saying now I can direct my next question toward her. I just got an email from a constituent. It says the Department of Aid and Independent Living is in the midst of reforming the development of services by implementing payment reforms and conflict-free case management.
There we go.
So there's currently placeholder language in the BAA. As you develop permanent language, you encourage to accept the market partners' proposed language, which includes a 7% utilization threshold. You know, the initial full year of reforms. Can you just educate me a little bit on that? I don't have Dale, I don't know the lines or.
That's the language that I'm working on with Nolan, because there is language in here as number 80. 83. That
Page 57.
there.
Yeah.
So there has been a discussion going on for at least a year now between the Dale and the designated agencies, and there's a new payment process for designated agencies. And we can talk about it when I have the language in, but essentially what's happening is that designated agencies are don't have the money to cover their costs, and that could cause them to go into the red. So what we're trying to find is a way of sustaining them over the next 17 months, more or less, while the new payment system gets into place. So we'll have Dale's had one perspective, and the agency, the DAAs had another perspective on how to accomplish that. And I think that we've finally gotten to a place where we might have some total, both are dissatisfied, but can come together.
Because this comes from the director at NCSS in St. Albans.
Yes,
Last line is a 70% utilization threshold will help us to maintain quality services and a stable workforce while developing workflows to achieve a higher utilization rate.
right. So that means paying up front for 70% utilization, and then allowing for the DA to use that money. And if they don't reach that 70% utilization, they'll have to pay it back. So that, so there's a concern about what's the right number for what you're asking, 70%, 80%, 60%, what is it? So we're kind of,
That's something else small, I think.
huh?
That's something you'll look at small.
That's what I'm looking at, and I do have some language that will be able to bring in. I've been working with Nolan on it, but it is a huge concern. We cannot lose our DAs. We absolutely cannot lose our DAs. There's a huge system across the state for folks who know that. So we want to make sure that we get the number right. That's essentially what we're saying, because numbers mean people who are being cared for. Ultimately, it's not about the dollar. It's about the human being who's being cared for with that dollar.
And in my last question, I'm also very late, but I was saying I got a questions.
Good.
Of that $50 million that we set aside for anticipation of lacking federal, then my understanding that we spent or proposing $5 million for AOA. When we just discussed for section 8,
Yeah.
we spent 6.3 this for SNAP.
Yeah. plus.
So I bring us down to 39, plus there's a proposal for another 5 million for other senators was brought up today as far as coverage in case of
Yeah, Bruce language doesn't have a dollar number associated with it.
so you said 5 million.
And I think there might be, I heard the administration might propose changes to his language, and maybe that $5 million will come from them. I was thinking didn't we take some other money out of that 50 million up? Those are just, maybe I was thinking that 5 million for the section.
So we're down to 40, or 34, over 34 million now with everything. Yeah, well, that's including the 5 million, just take out, it's 39 million.
Right, it's 39 million if municipalities or if the language of Senator Bruce proposed passes, and municipalities or state can draw down funds. So right now, the language he proposed didn't have a cap, so if there was a cap of $5 million, that would be a benefit.
And I don't know if he's still online or not, but my concern when I heard that was, well, that's fine, but state police committee, they said they're down 60 positions. And the municipality, he's talking about the larger municipality, which was part of the becomes police movement. So I don't know who will be giving this money to, and there's not a whole lot of bodies that to do the work he's looking.
Right, well, I think it'd be overtime.
Oh, yeah, but still.
Yeah. So they would, that they might have forced overtime to have to deal with some emergency, and then they could go to the state and say, we have $1 million of overtime to deal with these protests or the situation. So they would get reimbursed for those.
Yeah, so during your absence, Senator Brown, we're talking about the proposal of additional monies for the 5 million, I guess came up originally the day there. I guess there's gonna be some discussion or like possibly change that it may come out of AOA instead of, I don't know what we're looking at here.
Yeah. You're talking about Bruce, that language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will they put a money in that transfer?
No, he didn't.
Okay.
So if it comes out of the 50 million, which is now 39,
39 now.
if we kept the 5, it's a section 85 million. Just check it out. So that language says you could spend 39 million. So that's why there was a concern that maybe there should be a cap on. Yeah, in case. Maybe you need 39.
But this was not, this was for the general fund?
No, this comes out of that 50 million.
Oh, okay.
That's as you'll see.
So while we're in session, we can make that decision, whether or
Yeah.
not Igor will do that for us.
Right.
So the other language I have is related to V301, it's global commitment and looking at, I don't think it will have, money in it, but planning and implementation, so. I'll bring that in tomorrow.
Okay.
I think tomorrow.
Okay. Very much. Do you have questions? Sarah?
Since we're talking about markups.
Yeah.
For this, so I apologize, I'm just at the beginning. So we're adding for the part that we were just talking about in terms of, the housing voucher, section 8, program. So having an affirmative vote of,
Yeah.
so as you mentioned, and then, wondering if we want to add, something like, distribution, having due consideration for, proportional distribution of the money.
Right.
Across.
Between those lines.
Yeah.
You mean for DCF? You're still talking about the 5 million?
Yeah.
Right, the different, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
We did another section.
No.
Work doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so
Because the only
What's
thing
that?
that Cameron pointed to was ensure the section is made available to all authorities
Mm-hmm.
across the state. You would like to see something about the appropriations being equitable.
yeah.
So you might want to
Yeah.
add a quick note, Cameron,
Yeah.
one of how you would want that worded. So I was hoping we would spend some time, close out some sections. Which we could just do for a while, or we could take a break and come back and work. What would you rather do?
Let's do it.
Which means we're-
We have a meeting at 3:30, so I'm happy to go through.
We'll go till 3:25.
Really? Okay.
So Amy, you want to do that, or do you want Emily? Or does Emily want to do it? Or does Emily want to even?
I don't know why you need either of us to do it.
Let's go.
Well, it helps. We're asking.
Gee, you're working.
So we will,
Except the one with the check boxes.
the one with the checkbox, you might want to see the worksheet too when the governor. I mean, you can do it from over there too.
Yeah.
That's, but we could just go through the starting, well, I assume we would not make changes to lines 2 through 7.
No.
There's nothing we're doing to generate more revenue
In a budget you already passed. That's
in the budget that we already, better, because this is looking backwards. So there's nothing we're gonna do there. So we would start on line 12, B 125. So the next 3 are these reorganizations. The first one is net neutral. I mean, they're all net neutral in the end, right? Because this is moving opposition.
It's moving, no, it's moving a bunch of things. It's moving all the committee assistants
Oh, right.
out of legislature to legislative council. Right? Opposition to JFO and some other.
Yeah, it's kind of restructuring how we staff the legislative function. And you'll notice nothing under the government recommend. There wasn't anything in the government recommend about this. This was something that basically, let's say, we're good oversight. The committee on legislative oversight approved this. We're talking about it, right?
Yes, we did.
So I'm assuming we can close out those 3 unless anybody here has a question or
No.
comment about
You're
it.
starting on line 12.
Yeah.
Site
Yeah.
12,
Yeah.
the 12, 13, and 14.
Yep.
Okay. The homeowner rebate is just a downgrade from a few, because fewer houses are eligible, they're sent out $1.5 million left. So.
Yeah.
Okay with that? Yeah, it's just kind of what happened more than what we're saying. And then that's the same with the renter rebate, just the other way. It's just a coincidence that it's the same amount, right? That's correct. It looks like there's some kind of correlation, and it's an estimate, right? It's for the rest of the fiscal year. So we're okay with that estimate. So here's the first one that the House changed something on. And this is the fund, which we sort of talked about yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we can either agree to this or if people still have questions, but it's basically that money for the municipals reappraisals.
Do we know why that was in the BAA as opposed to the big bill?
Governor didn't propose it. I don't know why I didn't go to the VA, but he did. House did.
And how's this funded now? This isn't a new thing, or is it?
It's general funded now, so it reduced the general fund and increased the.
So kind of the House, in a way, the House finds 3.41 million of general fund by moving this, taking out of the pilot fund, saying it's helping municipalities, it's connected to also to, well, I guess it's not connected to the local option.
But it's out of general.
It is now out of general fund. This would move it out of
This,
the pilot fund, which we heard from Rube yesterday that there's money in there.
Oh, wasn't
Did
it?
he say it was healthy?
He
Yes.
said the balance was still, he said this was still,
If I'm recalling, it was, isn't there, we're gonna make was it gonna be that there was a statutory change to make it continue to come out of general fund? They were just starting it.
this would be a continue all for the future years would all come out of the pilot.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not opposed to it.
I mean, we're gonna fund it one way or the other.
Yeah.
So do we fund it out of the general fund or could we fund it out of the pilot fund?
For,
Right, in the future, if the pilot fund it goes down, we could take it back out.
Yeah.
Funding general.
So the question is, do any of the amendments that we have coming in have, general fund implications? And the answer might be yes.
So,
Well,
so this would behoove us to go this route.
it's, well, the house spent this month.
There, it's been,
So regardless, we'd have to, if we had anything that had a general fund
We'd have to-
expenditure, you'd have to find it somewhere. You could find it here, you could find it somewhere.
okay.
And my question was just, do you do it now? Like, is there urgency versus do you just wait until the big bill?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't remember, we didn't ask,
that's what Chris,
we didn't ask Representative Shine, and I don't remember her saying, you guys, didn't know.
I don't think there's an urgency, but to your point. It's you're in the hole. You don't do it.
Right.
Well, then let's do it.
That's a problem.
Find another way to.
The biggest change in the House's budget adjustment is an additional $3 million to make sure that the ADEC for the teachers.
This is how they found it. This is, you could say this is how they found it.
That's the,
So if you didn't do this and then you still did the ADAC, you'd have to find 3 million. That's,
From somewhere else.
and since we don't have money on the bottom line,
Oh, I
other than
see.
like $18,000, I think we have about 18,000.
Oh my God.
Well,
You'd have to take it from somewhere. Or you'd have to get finance to raise a tax really fast.
So you can put it in the house.
that's fine.
Okay, so I'm gonna say we're closing that up.
17.
Okay, 18. As recommended by the governor, agreed to the House. Overall,
the sheriff.
judiciary. This is judiciary getting sheriffs,
There,
or getting deputy.
It is.
The sheriffs are busy. Any questions or concerns? Okay. Was that 18 or B 204? B 207. This is for the transport deputies and our knowledge. This was approved by the House, proposed by the governor.
Yeah.
You're okay with that? Okay, 207. Next 207 per diems. What was that? I can't remember why there was an increase, but it's only $5,000. They just had more per diems for admin. Do you remember? Okay. Why Amy's looking at funding for transport deputy establishment 27, which was last year. What was this $5,000? We approved it, but
We approved it, we didn't fund it, so we adjusted the GAA, which is looking at it.
And this is just. We funded part of it, it's $5,000, it's about $5,000, right? So that's 50,000.
50,000, it should be around 50,000.
Okay. So yeah, I do remember that. So that one will close out. That second $50,000. Public safety, that's. The internal service funds. Allocations. I think we're both okay with that. Overtime. Norris's favorite item, you okay?
Well, I am, I mean, the governor. That's a big wrong, so we cost $108,000 out of everybody else's budget, but that's fine. He said to me, so there must have been a need for public safety there, so.
You, just, I'm okay with it, I guess, but do you recall if that was the whole, well, Weiser and Burlington have a share in that, or did we put the whole bill for that?
I believe when we footed the whole bill, we at the time.
We fitted the whole bill.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to make this a practice, so,
Right.
in the future, I guess I'm okay with it now.
I don't know the name right now.
Yeah,
Right, and I see if they have their own overtime, and I think they might. Like, this is just state police, but I think they were sheriff and other. I think even like EMB was called in to help for a time, so this is part of it, but I get the point about not making it a on government expense. You'll just let me know when you find that in.
Yeah, I think it's all related to the accountability court.
Oh, the
You know,
per diem?
it's a whole package, yeah.
Okay, right. So we're okay with line. The line 24. That's the computer project. $570,000. Any questions there? I'm okay with it. This was just there were less guards used the tuition benefits, so there was less need for money, which we kind of knew was gonna happen, I remember in the budget. Curriculum review and development, because they're doing a new whole program, if I remember correctly.
There.
We're okay with it?
Mhm.
This is the $30,000 right? Deal with customer. Cut in or payment.
The 30,000 just from here till June 30th, right?
Yeah.
That's one work for June 30th.
Yeah, this doesn't affect their request. And then this is zero and neutral. This is just them rearranging how the SLAs are transferred or so. So I don't know why it's even because there's language in it. So it's
You know, some people want to have some folks like to talk about ADS. And others don't.
SLAs. Do people do that? Okay. But there's not language in them.
No, there's no
language section.
No.
A reconciliation for the human services. Secretary's office, question there, I don't think. Speaking of ADS, this was more money. ADS,
301, I may have language with that, so I don't really want to leave it open, that the money isn't, I don't think it's gonna be a money issue, but if we could just leave that open temporarily.
okay, that's line 31B 301.
Yeah.
And the DIVA admin issue, the $40,000, yeah, is that? Do you have one, pick that up in center line or?
No, that one I think is complete,
Something
Yeah.
swap?
yeah, that's it.
Oh, this was the transfer.
Yeah, it's just the.
Yeah.
Cover.
So 32.
32 goes out, yeah. I don't remember what the medical provider contract increase was for DIVA.
Mental health services. Prior authorization reviews. Is that?
Okay, it's your committee, so trust me.
Yeah, we'll be looking at it tomorrow, if something, if a red flag pops up.
Yeah, we can open these up. Lease for DIVA spend. This contract? What is this for? Lease for DIVA spend?
The Pilgrim housing.
Oh,
thing.
we're at that.
Yes,
It's not the lease of a building for the staff. You're not.
yeah, not the staff,
Not leasing
not leasing staff.
kind of like contracting. They also had new Oracle licenses, which is okay.
Yeah.
Probably connected.
Game contract amendments,
What was getting well? Isn't that
It's
the,
a healthcare.
care administration.
for employees? That's not the same one that the DOC's.
No, the game. Well,
Yeah, well,
Well, path.
right.
Oh, wait, I have to remember, is it well path for, well path
DOC.
currently for the DOC,
Right.
right, Gamewell is different, it's, yeah.
I don't know Gamma, but I know about that.
I do know, I've been to visit
Our committees.
Gamewell.
Okay, there's still data warehouse.
Yeah, that's important.
Increase of other
Yeah.
organizations up, that's okay. So this is the funding swap that we did an earlier one. Okay. Clawback, I don't remember talking about the clawback.
Did you just go, sure, did you just go K 38, 39?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything with the clawback? Are they clawing back from whom?
It's a federal thing. Related to pharmacy, I think. It's a good Nolan question.
It's a good Nolan question.
Okay, well, that helped them.
It's just an update, like the feds say this is your number. Yeah. You can pay it. Or they give you less of a number and you pay less.
That's kind of like a true up more than a clawback.
It's a true up of the clawback.
Okay.
The clawback is the.
So is that open or are we going?
I think we can close it. We'll center line will tell us to open it back up. She finds that. And then we already did this is net is $0 is related to.
Yeah.
39. Close out 41.
Chip case important.
Yep.
This is.
That's the deed. So we'll close out that. And then more of the EP and the need to close out 312. And then this is one, the house changed, they took $50,000. And you see over in the column, they divided that money out for HIV prevention. I think there was some federal. I remember talking to them. Was there a federal?
No, that's all general.
But no, was it in response to some federal action on HIV funding?
I can't remember. No.
I think there was some.
I think.
Is this? We didn't see your testimony, but we could. There's these 3 organizations giving money for HIV prevention and treatment.
Didn't they close one in Burlington, the center?
Yeah.
Is this
I think this is part of it,
part of it?
but it's broad, that it's also in southern.
I think there was some reason about these dollar numbers. And I think we gave them money in last, obviously, this is the budget adjustment. We gave them money last year in the budget. And this just adjusts the. I did talk to them and
I did say that.
this doesn't tell us this 312. But I thought there was some wording.
There's section. 25.
Section 27.
Section 25 will just give.
Just numbers. Oh, what do you, B312? There?
I thought there was some in the language section where they had the 3 organizations.
Oh, it's not in. It's not. Oh. I'm
Well,
sorry.
that-
77. Section 77.
77.
Section 77?
77. Yeah.
Yeah,
section
on page 52.
Okay.
Typical parking meeting.
Huh?
You have to go park.
Yeah.
No. Down.
No,
I'll be good.
well, should we? I'm okay with this one. Say.
Oh, right, I remember this. Yeah, it was the 3 centers that needed an increase to cover expenses.
Yeah. So we'll close that one out and then we'll close out our work for the day. We got 244 for not that bad. Okay, we only have one that will be left up.
So a lot of the next section and some of what we've done, hopefully our committee will go through tomorrow.
Yeah, the
I don't know that
DMH,
we'll be able to add anything more than we've added in here.
yeah, the DMH and DCF. Dale stuff.
Dale stuff.
To your committee. I mentioned the correction steps to your chair of judiciary. You seemed like you wanted to take committee time. Talk about it,
About what?
just the changes to corrections.
No, we had corrections in the statement we were talking about, so really use their budget, but big heart came in, but.
Oh, and also the other judiciary thing was the deficit of the council for the record checks, for no record checks. Right.
Well, so I don't still don't know where to go for that. It's a one-time thing where it's through DPS, right? As
Yeah,
far as
we're just
raising
their fee,
their fee or something here, what do we, what was it, $1,059,000 they were in us full on
Yeah.
that?
And then, weren't they gonna send us information about how many criminal record checks they have?
I meet with them tomorrow, so.
Okay.
Jeff Wallen now, because from DCI, so.
So yeah, it's like, would a $5 fee raise all the money and then, or are we just gonna have them come in next year and ask for, fill the deficit again? Or, and is that something that we wanna do, or do we want, if we were to add a fee to the budget, it would have to go over to finance, because it would be a fee.
Senator Cummins said, no, she don't handle it over there. That's talk to her about it. He said it was judiciary, she had to go to judiciary. Well, I remember when we were in job ops, we'd be with OPR and they would be
Yeah,
the ones that would.
any fee increase has to
fees.
go to finance. Louis would send it to them. Maybe she just didn't want to do.
Well, it's not that I'm pushing here.
Yeah, yeah.
Where does it start is all I'm saying.
Yeah,
There is some language in section 53, that the House put in for a report back to
oh, that's.
next year
They,
about how to make
Okay.
it not going
that's
to
right.
again.
That's how House dealt with it. They said, you need to come back and what's your sustainability plan?